Welcome to the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast, brought to you by The Draft Professor. The Draft Professor is a group of podcasters bringing you daily draft podcasts and is home to the only dynamic mock draft simulator which allows fans to mock draft against other fans. The Draft Professor Simulator features a first-round challenge, 5 unique one-round drafts. The Draft Professor Simulator features a second-round challenge, 10 unique 2-round drafts. All mock drafts are always picking against the fans and draft analysts which use the simulator. Every mock, every pick, every time. The Draft Professor also features ranked players functionality, where you can rank your favorite players at every position. Optionally, you can add tiers to your rankings to show what round you have the players graded in. The Draft Professor also features Draft a Team functionality, which allows users to snake draft a team of 22 players to demonstrate your my guys, compare player strengths, and discuss draft prospects in a way no other mock draft simulator can. Thank you for tuning in to the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast. This episode will begin shortly. Well, welcome to the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast. This is our second podcast of the night. I believe it is the first time that Scott and Rudy have been with us. So welcome, both of you, and thank you. Rudy, how you doing this fine Thursday night?
I'm doing great, man. Just ready to get this going. Doing well. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Scott, it was great chatting with you before the show. How you feeling right now?
Feeling good, man.
Cool.
It's the combine. I'm like kind of looking at it here and there. So if I'm randomly looking to the right, don't judge me.
Yeah, so we got the NFL scouting combine going on as we speak. It is day one of the combine. It's on right behind my camera too. And we're going to go over some edges. And are the edges running? When are the edges running at the combine? When's everybody
They just ran.
They
just ran.
Okay, so they are running literally today. So today was defensive line.
Correct.
Got it. I didn't know if today was defensive tackle or defensive line. So you could be watching some of these guys run literally right now, and then we're going to be talking about where they are on the board. And Scott, this is your board that you had sent to me, and then Rudy, you're going to chime in on where you have some of these guys rated as we go through. So, Rudy, who is your top edge?
That's a good question. I look back at this and I think to myself, Abdul Carter comes to mind. Now, I know he was injured in November, and I recognize that, his limited playing time throughout the remainder of the regular season may have hampered his draft capital just a little bit. And I say that because, having a foot injury, that's kind of a big deal, right? Because you're on them every snap. You don't have the ability to just take a snap off and say, you know what, I just can't do this, or be a player and walk off the field. It doesn't happen that way. I think he's still the consensus number one overall pick. I just don't know that he's going to be the consensus number one pick. And there are a lot of teams that are in need right now. I mean, let's be honest with you. Just a few years ago, the Dallas Cowboys decided to pick all defense. That was their first round moniker, was all defense. And there was a lot of defensive players to be had. This year, there are some, but not as good as we had seen in the past. It has nothing to do with the guys that are available. It's what's available and good for your team. So the pick that I would probably have, I'll stay with Abdul Carter until I see something contrary to him going first overall.
Okay. And Scott, who is your number one edge?
It's Abdul Carter. I think he's probably got the highest ceiling of these guys in the class. Comp-wise, Micah Parsons. I'm not as worried about the foot injury because as a Falcons fan, I saw that same injury that he has, that same broken metatarsal with Julio Jones. So outside of when Julio Jones broke the screw in his foot in 2013, he basically played almost every game of his career. So, and as an edge, you're not playing 100% of the snaps unless your team has no one else in rotation. You're probably playing 70, 75% as the top edge on your rotation. So I'm not as worried, like, oh, if he needs a couple downs because his foot's hurting and he just played 10 straight snaps, like, yeah, whatever. That's fine. I should have someone that can go in for 3-4 snaps to help out.
Right.
So Abdul Carter, I'm not as worried about. I do think he should go ahead and get the surgery after his pro day so he's ready for the season, just because I think that's the smart move. But that's a whole other conversation. But yeah, Carter's a beast. Comps well to like a Micah Parsons type. You know.
Got it. And then
He definitely has the physicality. He definitely has the physicality as well.
And I'd say his floor is like a Clay Matthews-ish type guy.
Yeah. And then, Scott, your number 2 edge is Princely Umalalen from Ole Miss. So what do you like about Princely that you have him at number 2?
So growing up, my favorite pass rusher was John Abraham. Saw him just wrecking teams. When the Falcons traded for him, I was ecstatic because he was one of my favorites back when he was in South Carolina. So when we got him in Atlanta, I was like, let's go. And Uman Mielen fits that same kind of mold that a lot of the more modern pass rushers have. It was Abraham, and then there's a bunch of people that fit his same mold. But then you have, I think long-term, his ceiling could be as high as a TJ Watt. He's a top-tier athlete. He's a guy who gets after it. He plays with an attitude. He plays against the run hard. He struggles against the run, but he plays against it and he gives the effort against it. So to me, that says that's a technique issue and not a doesn't want to do it. Some of these other guys have a doesn't want to do it issue against the run, and I don't like that, and that's why they might be a little bit lower. Because as a defensive end, as an edge, as an outside linebacker in the 34, you got to play against the run, or at least be willing to play against the run, and willing to set the edge, and willing to at least take on a blocker and pull the blocker out the way and let your linebacker go free.
Yep.
So
the saying that I like hearing is you have to earn the right to rush the passer.
Correct.
Right. You have to be able to play the run to earn that right to tee off on 3rd down. So,
and he's not bad against the run. Don't get me wrong. He's just not good against the run either. He's very neutral. Like, he does the job. He doesn't stand out against it, but he doesn't, like, I don't know how you qualify that as, it's not a plus, but it's not a minus. He's there. He does his job.
Yep. So, Rudy, who is your edge to?
I'm going to go with Uman Mielen. Look, in 12 games, he collected 37 total tackles. 14 of those were for loss. So he knows how to get into the backfield. He has the physical agility to get in the backfield. Not only that, but he forced a fumble. He had 10.5 sacks. So he's not supplant against the run. It's just a matter of coverage for him. More like, I would say he's kind of more of a hybrid between the edge rusher and maybe the back off DT, right? Because if you know that you're going to be good in pass coverage and or prevent massive gains from the snap, right, or snap to throw in a wide out in a slant position, he's going to be that guy. He's going to sit back a little bit, maybe a little bit of cushion right underneath the DTs, and then make those stops. He's a very physical guy. He's got a brother as well who follows very similar characteristics as he has athletically. So beast mode, if you will, part 1, and beast mode number 2. If you're looking for a guy who's good in coverage, who handles those tackles for loss and is able to get into the backfield when you need to, right? Maybe a zero blitz, maybe 3rd and short, something, of that nature offensively. If you're struggling, you can't move the chains, he's going to be that guy to make that penetration. So if there's anyone who's going to get that pick, it's definitely going to be him for sure.
And for me, it's more of a 1A, 1B. Like him and Abdul, I have the exact same grade on. I think they're the same level of good. It's just who do I like better stylistically? Personally, I like Princely a little bit better for, say, Atlanta, but I like Abdul better for, say, Tennessee or New England. So it just depends. Like Abdul Carter in New England with Vrabel's defense would be so much fun to watch, just to throw an example out there. So,
Okay.
Or the Steelers, for that matter, only because their defense is aging. You have Cam Hayward, who I had the pleasure of interviewing just a couple of years ago during the Super Bowl when the Eagles met the Chiefs the first time around, and he's getting long in the tooth. I mean, he's getting older, and so you have to replenish that line, if not right up front, earn the spot, and I think that's where he will ultimately lead to.
Yep. And then Rudy, who is your edge 3?
I'm going to go with Kyle Kennard. And I say that because he wanted to up his coach's decision to say, you know what, can you do this better? He challenged him. And so Kennard, 28 tackles, 15 and a half tackles for loss, one of the highest pass rushing grades that you're going to find, especially in the SEC, who is filled with nothing but defensive juggernauts. So, he's an All-American, Bronco Nagurski guy. I mean, he has a nose, literally, for the football. He can smell it a mile away. So he's got to be my edge. And I think that Sterling Lucas had a lot to do with that growth pattern for him. And I think that's going to continue for him from an agility and athletic standpoint at the next level.
Okay.
So,
go ahead, Scott.
I was gonna say, so I really like Kyle Kennard. Like, if I have a guy, even though he might be like 15th or 17th or 19th, it doesn't mean that I don't like the guy. It just means that I have these other guys that I think are better than him, that I think are going to have better careers.
Yep.
And Kennard, to me, just schematically, it's tough to find a fit unless the team is a true 4-down lineman set on pretty much every down. And he's out there in that 6, that 7, sometimes the 5, but that's his bread and butter, and that's where you're using him. He's going to set the edge. He's going to stop the run. He's going to get after the passer, but he, against the pros, I don't know if he has the functional strength to be impactful right away. He can build it, but I think long-term, 3-4 years down the line, he could be that sleeper in this class. I do really like Kennard.
So yesterday we did a episode where we did 32 defensive scheme fits for 32 teams. So they could go through, the podcasters could go through any defensive player they wanted. And one of the guys said Kennard, put him in wide 9 in Cleveland. Right?
He would be okay there. But
that's going to be.
I can see that.
You're right. Meaning that if you marry the player with the scheme, you might say, to you guys' point, how did we pass him up? But it's all about knowing the scheme that you have the year you draft him. And he should play in a scheme which lets him line up as the 5, the 7, or the 9, like you had suggested, Scott. Yeah. You have to know how to use him to his maximum effectiveness. So I definitely liked that. And Scott, who is your third edge?
So for me, it's Michael Williams out of Georgia. If I'm betting on a guy with traits, but maybe not the most production, he's just got every trait I think you need as a pass rusher, as an edge defender. Now, I will say I don't give bonus points for coverage ability. Because for me, if your edge is dropping into coverage, you have problems with your scheme. Or you have problems in coverage in general. Because these guys' job should be to get out after the passer and to stop the run. Like, I hate dropping these guys. Like, if my edge plays 700 snaps in a year and he's rushing the passer for 350 of them, and he's stopping the run for 340, and he drops into coverage for 10 on some surprise zone blitz, that's what I want to see. I don't want any of these guys dropping into coverage more than a couple snaps. So, like, Michael Williams, I don't think he's good in coverage at all, from what I've seen. Living in Georgia, I've seen a lot of them. But the dude can get after the passer. He's got great hand usage. He comes with a pass rush plan. the thing that's been kind of hurting his production is actually traceable too. It's injury. You can see like, oh, he's a little bit slow off the snap this time. And when it came out that he had the injury, I was like, that makes so much sense for his senior year film or his final year film. Like, you could see him struggling to get out of his stance in some snaps.
Okay. And Scott, you have Mike Green as your fourth edge. What do you like about Mike Green that you have him at 4?
Just a maniac, just a Tasmanian devil coming off the ball. Like, some of these guys, they're good at one thing, and that's okay. And Mike Green is one of those, I'm getting after the quarterback kind of guys and not dropping him into coverage. I'm not playing him in the run as much as I can. Like, I just want him going out there, Tasmanian deviling around a tackle and just getting to the quarterback. That's all I want to see. And Mike Green is one of those guys that, like, you know what? I'll teach him how to – I look at it from, like, a coaching perspective too, because, like, I can teach him how to play the run. I can't teach him how to just get off so quick. I can't teach him how to go out there with very minimal understanding of hand usage, because he's got like 3 moves and he uses them and he counters them off each other, but he's got like 3 moves. I can't teach him the natural instinct that those 3 moves are. So he gets after the quarterback. He productive, creates a ton of pressure. Again, tackles can't handle his speed. Like, I think he's a faster, stronger player when it comes to speed to power than James Pierce is. And Pierce just ran a 4.5. Like, and to me, they're very similar guys. Like, very similar guys.
And Rudy, who is your edge number 4?
It's got to be Mike Green as well. And I say it because you look at production. His production has like quadrupled. Right, 354 snaps and pass rush snaps versus 183 the year prior to that. So it shows that he's trainable, he's coachable. All coaches love that. That's something you can't get away from. You can't teach availability, especially when a guy like him who knows how to get after the passer. He's like crazy good off the line. I mean, you don't know where he's going to be. It's almost like can't even compare him. I mean, can't compare him to Troy Polamalu. But I mean, as far as line-wise, he's going to get after you. It's just a matter of where he's lined up and how he's going to get back there. I don't know that I have him on a round 1 pick, maybe later in the first, like maybe 30th, 31st. I know the Chiefs just re-signed Smith, so that certainly doesn't help his cause. But because of defensive production and what the Chiefs look like in the Super Bowl, this guy could be like the wild card piece to it if he slips that far. His hurries were good. He had a batted ball last year. I mean, he just does crazy things. His athleticism has a higher ceiling than I think most people give him credit for. But I don't see him going off on like the 10th overall pick. That's just not going to happen. Okay. He's good. He's just not 10th round pick good.
No, I think he's like 20 to 25 range where he actually gets picked. And I probably
somewhere there, yeah,
higher than that because I would take him higher. I'd take him at 20. So, but I could see him going 20 to 25. Like, when I set my board, I set where I would take these guys. I don't care where they go in the NFL. How the NFL picks them when I'm stacking my board. Yep. Mock drafts for me are for prediction. This is for how good I think they're going to be in the league. So,
yep. Understood. So, Rudy, who is your edge 5?
There's a sleeper guy. We're talking about sleeper guys, right? And I don't think he's sleeping on this. He's actually quite awake, and that's K. Robinson from Alabama. To me, he's a grade A guy. He's grade A, maybe a day 2, maybe low day 1, like somewhere in the latter 20s. But what's going to hurt him and hurt his production and hurt draft stock for him to climb into that next echelon, and maybe he could even go 32nd. We've seen guys like Lamar Jackson get drafted 32nd overall in the first round in 2018. They say he was going to be a wide receiver, never start at quarterback. Of course, we know that's obviously not accurate. But I think injuries are really going to hurt his ability and his availability on the field at the next level. But his pass rush percentiles at 24%. That's good. That's really good.
Yes.
And like ranked second in draft eligibility for edge defender. So if there's a sleeper in this, at least in the first, if not mid second round, maybe low first, like super low, 32nd overall, I think this guy could be a diamond in the rough. The problem that I see for him is that he's had limited snaps. He's 6'5" and could be a standout at the combine to his positive. So to me, he's a wild card.
Robinson from Alabama, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Scott.
I would say I don't agree with that just because I've watched a lot of him. He's got the athleticism. I think he's very solid, but he's like a late day 3 guy for me. Just from where I've got him. And there's a disconnect there. I don't know what it is, but like the athleticism's good, but he gets injured. He doesn't get snaps. There's always someone ahead of him on the depth chart.
Like, I noticed that.
Yeah. So the player, but in fairness, Scott, the players that were ahead of him on the depth chart were first round NFL picks, right? I mean, that was Dallas Turner.
Yeah.
I think Chris Broswell went in round 2, right?
Yeah, they were first, second round guys.
Right.
But like he wasn't getting as much playing time, not just because those guys were great, but also like Saban does rotate his guys a lot.
Fair enough. So, so for fans that are watching the podcast, so Q Robinson isn't on Scott's board here. He's definitely a player I like. I think I'm in the middle of the two of you. So, for example, I'm a Bills fan. If Brandon Beane spent one of his second-round picks on Q Robinson, I'm like, that's a typical Brandon Beane pick because he's a 5-star recruit, has all the athletic ability, but between injuries and maybe a few other things, he hasn't quite gotten onto the field. But how often, if you're picking in the back of the round, do you get a chance to draft a player that has traits like that? As well as Rudy said, he has production when he was on the field. He just happened to get hurt. So I definitely like the Q Robinson shout out. Scott, you have Nick Scourton as your edge 5. What do you like about Scourton that you have a first-round grade on him?
And this goes back to his Purdue film. He knows how to set up a pass rush, but he plays the run extremely well. And again, this is if I'm in a 4-down lineman set, I need that strong side defensive end, that guy who could be like a Cam Jordan, where you could potentially get 6 to 10 sacks every single year out of this guy. And he's going to stuff the run, and he's going to be that leader. He's going to have some attitude. I think Scourton's the guy. Like, I think he's that strong side end, and I think you could even use him in some 3-man sets as, a 4-eye or a 5 technique that could get some pass rush, the way the Falcons used to use Patrick Kearney back in like 2003. And Kearney got like 8 sacks out of playing a 5 technique. I don't think he's got, a super high 20, 25 sack ceiling or anything like that. But I think he can be a guy who can come in, play 700 snaps, add to your pass rush. He's never going to lead your pass rush, but he's going to add to it. And then you'll go from there. But he's going to stuff the run. He's going to add some attitude. And sometimes that's all you need.
Yeah. And Rudy, who is your edge 5?
I'm going to take Scourton, but I have my reserves on him. And I say that, you're talking about the 4 technique. And I like him there. I don't know about the 3-man pass. He could get into the backfield more often than not, but I'm not. Okay, fine. So conference 10 high sacks, that's great and wonderful. I like his athleticism. He knows where to go and how to do it. His stance is great. I love his agility. He spent a lot. He spent 3 seasons with the Aggies, so he's learned a lot. and continues to learn. Again, learnability is also one of those things you have to look at as well. But I mean, he had 31 tackles, 6 of those went for a loss. So in a 4 technique, I see a more on a solidifying component, but the leader of the pack, not likely. But I like his play. I enjoy watching him play. I mean, the guy he's got a motor. You just can't stop a motor, right? Unless you run out of gas or you don't have any oil in it. Either way, he's one of those guys where, you're looking at him and thinking, wow, if it wasn't for him, the Aggies would not have been as successful. So could he be successful at the next level with a team that could use his technique? Absolutely. Question is who's going to take a chance on a guy like that unless you run that scheme?
And Rudy, you actually just said something that when somebody said the same thing about Scourton many podcasts ago, but they said it almost the same way that you did, and correct my verbiage. But if I heard you say it is, you don't want Scourton to be your number 1 edge, but if you put him opposite somebody that's like a dominant edge, you're saying that he's a really good edge number 2 for your team. Is that how I heard you describe?
That's a correct interpretation. Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Scott, what do you think of that interpretation of Scourton?
I think you need as many pass rush bodies as you can get, and even if he's a high-end number 2 in your scheme, high-end number 2 pass rusher for your team, that's a win in the first round.
Yes,
because you pair him with a guy like, I don't know, you looking for a guy to potentially replace Cam Hayward. I think this could be that guy. He's going to have to gain a little bit of weight on his frame, don't get me wrong, but this is that kind of guy that you want because he's going to have that motor. He's going to have that same kind of attitude that Hayward brings. He's going to play the run, and he'll get 7-8 sacks, and that's what you want. He's a piece. But when you've got a TJ Watt, and you've got a Highsmith, and you've got like 3 other guys behind those guys, why not? I could see Denver falling in love with him as a guy to pair on the same side as Jonah Ellis.
Yep.
Put him in that 5 technique, have Ellis outside as the outside linebacker, and let them go to town and let them go to work. Ellis is going to get 12, 13, 14 sacks in Denver every year once he fully gets up to it. Scourton getting 7 or 8 next to him, that's 20 sacks. If your goal is a defense to get at least 45 a year, 50 a year, you're already, 40, 45% of the way there. That's what you want.
And Rudy, who is your edge 6?
I like the Tyleik Williams. I do. I like him a lot. He's very selfless. I mean, he's 6'3". He's a big boy. he carries the mean potatoes, right?
As an edge?
Yeah, like as an edge. Like I see it as like a 3-tack, a 1-tack, but as an edge.
Well, you can always scoot. All he needs to do is gain some athleticism and lose some weight. Get in shape. Maybe a spot there, perhaps. Maybe compare to a guy like, I don't know, Trey Hendrickson, right? Bigger body, larger frame. Knows how to get after the passer, but he did successfully against many teams. Steelers were one of them throughout throughout last year's campaign. And of course, Bengals did have a conversation with Tyleik. He's like a fleet of foot guy. He's going to be the one that's going to sustain the outside, but maybe more so playing on the inside. But I don't know. I guess it would just depend on a variety of things: his size, his speed, his ability to maybe become that much more athletic and gifted foot-wise. And people thought Jerome Bettis wasn't going to do anything in the NFL. I mean, he got drafted by the Rams, and then what happened? The rest is history. Won a Super Bowl ring, fleet of foot, big-bodied guy. Had a chance to speak to him a couple of years ago.
Yep.
But look what happened. Steamrolled how many guys to get to the end zone, including Brian Urlacher of the Bears?
Yep.
It's possible. It's possible.
Scott, who is your edge 6? It's Shamar
the Ricky Bobby pass rusher. Shamar Stewart. Ricky Bobby pass rusher is a term that I've been throwing around online for probably a decade now, but it's a guy that wants to go fast but doesn't know how to use his hands. And that's Shamar Stewart. Literally no production. You are Mike Mamula-ing him up boards. And like it's all about his athleticism and all of that. He's got some pressures here and there. He doesn't hit quarterbacks. He doesn't sack quarterbacks. He doesn't really affect the run that well. This is a pure athleticism play. Like, I'm not going off of any production here. I'm literally just going off this dude athletically is created in a lab to play edge. Do I have the coaches that can teach him how to play edge the proper way? No idea. But if I did, this would be a guy who I would consider. Also, do I have the veteran guy to train him up? Do I have this? I think his best fit is probably a place like Los Angeles with the Chargers. Having Mack and Bosa, and, obviously they would need to re-sign both those guys, but having Mack and Bosa there to kind of train him up and teach him what to do and really get him in the right mindset. And they could potentially grow him into his potential. Potential is sky high. Floor is dude's out of the league next year. Like, does not get it. Like, I'm dead serious. Like,
I agree with you.
I'm kind of hoping the Saints or the Panthers draft him. That's how, like, low I think his floor is. And he's been in college for 3 years and no improvement. Like, at some point, it's got to click. And it just has not. And he loses 25 pounds and comes to the combine and he looks like a completely different athlete. Because honestly, I thought he was going to be like a 4'9" guy at 290 pounds. And it's a completely different mold. Like, I didn't have him on my edge list. I had him more on my defensive lineman list because I saw him as that, like, 5 technique, like, to use another Steeler, Brett Kiesel type. Ceiling of like 4 or 5 sacks, but disruptor, gets in the backfield, forces the quarterback off the spot, that kind of guy. But just losing all the weight kind of shifted my thoughts. Like, okay, maybe he could play the edge. He's got the athleticism for it. But there's just a disconnect here. Like, and I only have him this high because I'm like, I could see it in the perfect situation. But
that's going to be tough in the NFL.
If he goes
to find the
top
perfect
10,
situation.
If he goes top 10, that perfect situation at best might be the Saints with Cam Jordan kind of like leading them around and being like, here's how you do shit. But even then, I still don't know if I trust that. I don't know. I don't think Stewart's great, but I think he's got the athleticism to take a gamble on.
Yeah, but how high do you go in that gamble? It can't be top. It's not going to be round. It's not going to be day 2. It may be day 3. Maybe.
No.
Maybe.
For me, that gamble's high day 2, because if he hits, he's 15 sacks a year. If he hits,
it's about floor versus ceiling and how teams draft. And I'm one of the great things about running Draft Professors. I can even tell, do evaluators like floor ceiling? It seems like every Bengals analyst that I talk to, they evaluate floor. So they'll have like Tyleik Williams higher than a Derek Harmon based upon they like Williams' floor. But same thing, they'll knock Stewart down because the floor is really low. But then if you look at certain GMs, like going back to like the Q Robinson, for example, that's a ceiling pick. And I know Brandon Beane drafts for the ceiling. He is, but in order to draft for ceiling, you either have to be really new at your job or have a lot of job security. Right. And here's what I mean. Like Joe Shane. Well, no, and this is what I mean. Like Joe Shane can't be worried about trying to reach a player's ceiling. He needs guys that are going to help him keep his job now. Right. It's all about this year. Whereas if you're Brandon Beane, if you're Les Snead, I'm trying to remember the guy. Is it Carl Peterson in Kansas City?
It doesn't. Whoever Kansas City's GM is, he's safe.
So they have job security, which means that they can take a swing for a player with a high ceiling, and if they miss, they know that they have to do better, but they have more than one way to hedge their bets, right? So as a GM, they'll be better if the players they draft for the ceiling hit it. But if you're a GM on a hot seat, like a Ryan Poles or Joe Shane in New York, those GMs, or the guy in Miami, is it Greer? Yeah. They can't take the chance of a player missing, so they may not be able to afford to draft for the ceiling. So, but I think it just depends on how they evaluate, because I would love Stewart in Buffalo in round 1. I would love it. The only player I would take over Stewart for Buffalo is Golden or Grant. Right?
But with Buffalo, you have Von Miller. You have, Ed Oliver there on the inside creating havoc. You've got guys there, Rousseau, I want to say.
Yeah, and Stewart
got the guys there in front of him.
Buffalo's starting edges are under contract. He won't start. But
he'd be 30% of the snaps as a rookie, 40% as a second year, and then finally would start. He'd get trained up by one of the greatest pass rushers ever in Von Miller.
Yep, exactly.
So it's a whole different thing.
But even if he bottoms out, it's not going to be the end, right? Every year, Buffalo has about 3 new edges on the roster. I mean, that's probably why our defensive line is in shambles, is we keep signing guys to 1-year contracts. But they're more than comfortable signing guys to 1-year deals and then letting them go. Right? We've had Leonard Floyd, and then we had Dwayne Smoot, and the list just goes on and on. But
then it's not going to stop anytime soon, I can assure you.
Yeah.
But a guy who needs a bounce back year, Cap is really like where I really stand, like really, really, really understand the NFL. If you can get a guy on a 1-year, $1.5 million deal, and he comes in and he gives you 5 sacks and plays the run decent for 300 snaps, you just crush that contract.
Yep.
He overplayed it and outplayed it. Absolutely. Well, that seems to be like the vet min. I mean, that's like vet minimum right now. Could that minimum go up because the cap increased, right? We think about that as well.
Now you say a $2 million deal.
Yep. So, Scott, you have James Pierce as your edge 7, and that's a round 1-2 grade that you have there for 6, 7, and 8, right?
Yeah, that's fringe first, early second.
So what do you like about Pierce that you have him that high?
He's the fastest pass rusher out there this year. He's just raw speed coming off the edge, and NFL teams, no matter how good they are, have the hardest time with raw speed. Cliff Avril is probably his best comp. And, he may peak out where Cliff Avril was, where he's a 7-8 sack guy. I think, honestly, that's kind of his floor. He's got a great ceiling, but if I'm taking Cliff Avril today, I'm taking him bottom of the first, early second. And I'm happy with it because, again, much like Scourton, much like one of these other guys, he may not be the number 1 pass rush guy on my team.
Okay.
But he's going to be a guy who comes in on third down in that clutch moment and gets me that sack. He's going to be one of the 2 guys on my team that I'm going to trust on that edge to come in and get me that sack. And to me, that's worth a first-round pick. If I'm at the back end of the first or the early second round, I'll take him right there, no problem with that.
Okay. And Rudy, who is your number 7 edge?
We haven't even talked about this guy, and I think it should be noted that Elijah Roberts out of SMU is a guy I don't think is getting a whole lot of love. And I say that, I mean, he's a consensus first-round pick, maybe top 5 at least. He kind of he took the position and said, I'm just going to make it better and do better. He's become highly productive, back-to-back seasons. Yeah, it tied from the most quarterback pressures. 130 among active, or excuse me, pass rushers over that genre and scope. And I like him because he's, I don't know, Central Arkansas. Where the heck is that? An unfamiliar school, not unknown, just unfamiliar. And I think that
Are
when you look
David
at the
Walker?
30s, excuse me?
I think they're talking about David Walker, not
Yeah,
Elijah
David Walker out of Central Arkansas.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, Walker. My bad. Yeah.
Hey, Robert,
Sorry.
SMU.
Yeah. No, Walker. I think. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was saying, like, Roberts is like 290 pounds, played at SMU, like,
Yeah.
more of a defensive lineman than a true edge. So,
Yeah, like Russell Brown just did a really good write-up on Elijah Roberts. So I could, with Walker, correct me if I'm wrong, but Walker is pure pass rusher. Like, he's designated pass rusher. You're probably on first down, he's going to be a liability against the run. Not just a guy, but that's the direction that you're going to run if he's on the field.
yeah, early Robert Mathis.
Yeah.
Right.
But at the same time, from a pass rush standpoint, he is somebody that has a bag of tricks.
Early Robert Mathis, which it's a guy worth drafting, but again, I have him a little bit lower than Rudy does, just because I do value run defense versus pure pass rush versus, like, obviously my ratings you got different types throughout, but I see David Walker as a lesser version of, say, Jalen Walker, or a lesser version of a James Pierce, or a lesser version of, even like a Powell Ryland type guy. So good player, really good player. I just don't have him in the same area that Rudy does.
Yep. And then you have Jalen Walker rounding out your round 1-2 grade, Scott. So what do you like about Jalen Walker that you have him at 8?
So there is going to be a group of NFL teams that are going to copy the concept that the Falcons had with Caden Ellis this past year, where the guy's not truly a linebacker, the guy's not truly an edge defender, but you align him wherever you want on that second level, and you have him get after the passer on third downs. And you have them shoot the B gaps, you have them shoot outside, you have them, sometimes drop into coverage and shoot your other linebacker in, and start playing a lot more of those Saban-esque games with your inside linebackers to really throw off the center's call. And I could see Jalen Walker being high in that kind of role. Now, I consider guys who are primarily going to be used as pass rushers edges. And I think Walker is going to be one of those guys that he's going to have 150 snaps a year where he's getting after the passer. He's going to have 500 snaps a year where he's stuffing the run. And then he'll probably have 200 snaps a year actually dropping into coverage, but in really short zones because he's not great at coverage. But those 150 snaps a year, he could get 10 sacks in. And he could come in on a game looping around the edge. He can come in on a game just standing on the edge and wrapping back in. Like, he's a malleable chess piece for a defense, and I think that has value. Now, there are people talking about him going top 10 at one point. I don't see that. I don't think he's close to that good. I think he's got a lot of different things that he does well, but I think long-term his best role is that Caden Ellis in Atlanta type role, which is very ironic to me when I see Walker being drafted to Atlanta, because Ellis is entering the last year of his contract, and it's like, okay, well, you already know the role you're going to use him in. You already know how he's going to be used in Atlanta. That's how he was used at Georgia too, though. And I think if a team's smart, they use him the exact same way he was used at Georgia. And whether you classify that as a true edge, whether you classify that as an off-ball linebacker, you really want to try and limit his coverage snaps, is all I'm going to say.
Yep.
You don't want him out there 400 snaps dropping into coverage like he's Brian Urlacher, because that's not who he is.
So, Rudy, who is your edge 8?
I'm going to have to go with Jalen. I mean, the guy, he's AP All-American 2024. I mean, he has intangibles. He's going to be that roamer on the line, right? It's kind of like a QB spy, but at the line. He did a lot of great things last year. Excuse me, 8 tackles against Tennessee, 3 sacks against Texas. I mean, the guy has the physicality and knows where he needs to line up at in order to be an impact every time that ball snapped. I'm not afraid of his ability to scramble when he needs to stay in coverage. I mean, he didn't miss a game in 23. I mean, he played all 14. The guy is very durable, very personable, very coachable, trainable guy. I want to see more of what he has, especially at the combine, if he indeed got the invite. I don't know that he did or didn't. I'm not aware of that he did. Yeah. Oh, he got the invite. Okay.
He got the invite.
So
I don't think he's running today, though.
Yeah.
No, he's not running right now. But if he can perform at a higher level, good hand-eye coordination. I love that about him. Very physical guy. He has football IQ. I don't think that's mentioned too often, especially guys get at the next level when he has solid football IQ, because you can't roam the field unless you have the IQ to do so, to know when to do so, right? He had 10 QB hurries against Kentucky last year, not to consider Kentucky being a formidable opponent, because we're not. But just to being able to do the variety of things that he's done certainly puts him, and it's not even a day one, maybe mid-day 2, I suspect. But I think that really has a lot to do with what his showing is at the combine. Not to suggest that's like the ultimate marker, because it isn't. It's just a gauge of what these guys can do. And I see these runs saying non-official times. Well, of course not official times. There's officials, official time surrounding a lot of these events. But I mean, I like the guy. I think he has a lot. He has a competitive edge to him, and he wears that like a chip on his shoulder. And I think he'll do well at the next level. Where he lands, as far as what team, I couldn't even fathom, because a lot of teams do need defensive help, especially when you see a guy that knows how to get to the backfield early and often. I think every team looks at that as being a tangible component for them.
Okay, so that rounds out like the round 1-2 guys. Scott, before we move on to the list, let's do a little bit of a commercial here. So, Scott, you want to kind of introduce yourself to the Draft Professor crowd, let them know how they can find you and your other content.
Sure. So I've been doing draft content since the 2010 draft. So this is my 16th year covering 16, the draft.
Yeah.
I had a website, wound up closing the website down when I got picked up by Bleacher Report, went to the Falcons Wire, went to the Falcoholic, and this is all in a period of 15 years. So it sounds like a lot, but it's not as much as you think. Went from Falcons Wire to Blogging Dirty. Then this past year, I was just like, you know what? I really don't feel like redoing all the application stuff and all of that. So I've got a Substack. I'm going to do like actual rankings and writing up each position group. Top 10 basically is what I'll go over with those articles. On each group, I'll write stuff about the cap, but it's just on a Substack that I have. It's free. Follow it. If you go under my Twitter name at Karasik S, you'll find it. And yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel or anything. I just got tired of being forced to be on someone else's schedule. So I said, you know what? I'm just going to do my own thing. And if people like it, cool. If they don't, whatever. It's a hobby for me. I don't need it to pay my bills. I'm lucky in that aspect. So that's
nice.
Just if you want to see my thoughts, I do that, and then I know a lot about the money aspect of the game. That's where I really look into it, the cap stuff, contract specifics, really the mechanics of contracts is the fun part. When things trigger and what that means for decisions and all of that. But trying to get others to understand what Twitter posts is very tough, but you can only do what you can do.
I hear you.
But yeah.
Cool. Rudy, welcome to the channel. You want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on. Scott, I've seen you floating around, man. You do great stuff. So don't let anybody tell you otherwise, and I'm sure you don't, but just thought I'd throw that out there. I've been in broadcast media, my gosh, probably a better part of 11 years. Been to a couple NFL drafts, a few Super Bowls here and there. I really just try to bring an entertaining and factual component to a lot of the interviews and topics of conversation, and to be able to really bring out the types of adversities. You see guys, running this NFL combine. Everybody has a story. All players do, but not often is that story told, and or is it done accurately and passionately. And so you've got to be able to listen to the nuances. You learn a lot from these guys. I support the NFLPA and what they do for players that have, gone through heck and back, between leaving the NFL to, what are they doing now? Conversations like that to be had in addition. I love the player aspect to all of this. I think there's an underlying component to this. And I think it's a misnomer, to be honest, because people think, well, these guys retire and go into, back in their fetal position and go back home and do their thing. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but that's not always the case. A lot of these guys want to get out and do things and be productive and, give back to others because they have the platform to do so. That's what really does it for me. And that's why I've been in this for as long as I have. And I'll continue to do so. And no, I don't get paid for this as well. And as Scott clearly pointed out, I'm kind of in the same boat. I don't rely on this to make me money. I just do it because I love it. I enjoy doing it. And if you don't love what you do, don't do it.
Yep. Well, and Rudy, just to throw this out there, get in touch with Mohamed Sanu for the after what a player's career thing is, because his performance center is pretty cool.
Really? Okay. I'll check that out. Yeah. I'll be sure to reach out to him. Appreciate that.
Cool. And for anybody, if this is your first time catching the channel, we have daily draft content. So the Draft Professor is a group of about 42 people, about 15 of them podcast regularly. We have a lot of, let's say, spot starters when somebody, has to go out to dinner with their wife or is at the scouting combine or whatever. We have another 27 people that occasionally fill in. And then in the case of Scott and Rudy, this is just people I was communicating with on Twitter, and I put a podcast together, and that's kind of how this comes in front of you. But I want to remind you, daily draft content. So hit that subscribe on YouTube, and you'll be notified whenever we go live, which is at minimum twice a day. This is already the second podcast of the day, and we have one more coming at you in another hour where Newt, Bill, and Owen are going to be placing bets on the combine. So they're going to talk about which player is going to set whatever record. Like, I think it's going to be hysterical. And this is the great thing with having relationships with people that do the draft, right? Because like Owen and Newt are regulars, and they say, okay, Jim, here's how we're going to preview the combine.
Oh my God.
This wasn't my idea. This is them saying, this is how we're going to do it. And I absolutely love it, right? Because those guys are absolutely hysterical. So if you have a chance, catch that at 9, because I think it's going to be really funny.
Are there any parlays involved in the process?
They sent me the screenshots of one of the gambling websites as to what the odds were that a certain player does whatever at the combine. So I think it's going to come up. But like they just told me, Jim, make these screenshots, and this is the podcast. So at this point, I'm turning on the podcast, and I just have a front row seat to something I think that's going to be really funny. So So if you haven't seen Newt or Owen podcasts before, they are a treat. So Owen is a scout at the University of Buffalo, and he podcasts with us. And, I'm doing this for free. They're doing this for free. But we're just, draft professors, a bunch of guys that love the draft. Nobody at the Draft Professor gets paid. Some people get paid with their other stuff. But we're essentially the podcast channel for, let's say, draft freelancers. So that way, if people just want, like if somebody wants to come on like once a month, once a week, we have a forum, because it's way better to talk about this here than it is to engage with people on Twitter. Because you don't know who's behind that, SpongeBob or whatever account, right?
And those accounts that are created this month and have 3 followers and sit there and troll you.
Correct.
You're just like, what are we doing here? Why are we even like, I'm not responding to that guy. I'm just blocking that guy.
Well, you see, and the great thing with a podcast is that we can choose to acknowledge comments or ignore them, but we can just have a conversation. And as long as I get to have a conversation with people like you, as opposed to like looking at social media, I'm having way more fun with the conversation with you guys.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Of course.
I do want to plug 2 more things, and we'll get back to the Edge Big Board. So we have a 32 GM mock draft every Friday night. And if you want to sign up for it, just go to the NFL Draft Fanatic, and that's NFL Draft Fanatic. No, I am Fanatic. It's the handle. It's the Draft Professor Twitter page. The pinned tweet has the sign up. And then today we announced our final mock of the year. We are doing a 32 GM mock, 7 rounds with trades, April 11th, 12th, and 13th. So if you want to sign up, it's a group mock. And what I mean by that is that whatever team you sign up for, there are probably 3 or 4 people that you will have to work with and form a war room, because we don't want everybody to agree. That's the idea behind some of the content that we want to make. It's not just I'm making the pick for my teams. You're probably going to need at least one guy to monitor trades. You're going to need one person to monitor the draft, and you're going to need a team. So if you want to be involved, we'll get you in touch with other fans of your team, and we'll help you create your war room in addition to the main draft podcast, which is going to be talking about all the trades that were made and how the draft is evolving and things of that nature.
Just put me and Clint on a team for the Falcons with whoever else, and I'll be pretty happy with that, because
be careful what you're volunteering for, but yes.
Me and Clint,
that's exactly what we're looking for, because you and Clint may not agree on every player, and that's content that Falcons fans need to see.
Yeah. We'll talk about it. We'll be like, all right, so
yeah, that's the idea.
I can manage the board and stuff.
Yeah. So that's the idea. And I also know that's right before tax season, or right before tax day, which may affect Clint's availability as well. So I will reach out to you for Atlanta, Scott, after the podcast. So thank you.
All right, guys. Hey, it's been great. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. I must bow out.
Okay.
But it's been great. I love having this conversation. I appreciate you guys. I appreciate the information, and I'll reach out to Sanu.
Okay. Thanks, Rudy.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Take care.
Okay. So, Scott, I wanted to spend maybe like 5 or 10 more minutes on the board, but we don't need to go through
all
from
the guys.
Sawyer down to Ahmed Hassanin.
Yeah.
But if you had to look at your board, and if I had to ask you a couple questions, who do you think gets drafted higher than you have them on your board? Like, meaning like you may evaluate, like you want somebody that plays the run and pass, but who do you think gets drafted like higher than where you have them on your board?
So Donovan Eziruaku would be the name, from Boston College.
Yep.
Really, really talented player. But if I get that gut feeling that something's missing here, I can't put my finger on it, but there's just something missing here with this player. I'm not sure how I feel about them. I don't get any sort of hype when I watch him play. I'm like, yeah, I mean, he's almost a little robotic. Sometimes I get that feeling watching Donovan, and I'm just like, I'm not sure. If I'm just not 100% sure on a guy, I'm not putting him in my first round grade. Even a guy like Shamar Stewart, who I'm like fringe first, but I'm still like, oh, I'm sure about his athleticism. I'm sure about his ceiling. I'm not sure if he'll ever get there, but I am sure that he's got the tools to get there. Donovan, I'm not sure he's got all the tools to get there. You know? Landon Jackson, I think he's just limited in pass rush, but I think I could see a team falling in love with him, especially a 34 team that really wants that 5 technique. Kyle Kennard, to me, is one of those sleepers that a team that really values college production and above average athleticism, because he's not an elite athlete, but he's an above average athlete. So if you're like, you know what, I'll take the above average athlete with the really great college production. You know, SEC Defensive Player of the Years don't grow on trees, right? Mm-hmm. So that's the kind of guy that you're like, you know what, I'll take the chance on that in the bottom end of the second, top end of the third, no problem. That to me is a guy I'll take the chance on, even mid second, and just be like, you know what, I need an edge. This guy really fits my scheme. I love his attitude. He's a leader. He was the SEC Defensive Player of the Year. And if you're a Southern team in Carolina or Atlanta or Florida, like any of the 3 teams in Florida or, you know, Tennessee, and those, you take him, nobody's going to be like, oh, well, I'm so mad we drafted the SEC Defensive Player of the Year. They're going to be like, yeah, that's my guy. That's who I want. And especially Carolina. Carolina fans would take this guy round 1. The South Carolina and Carolina Panthers fans, because he's that kind of dude.
Yep.
But there are some guys on here that are easily going to go higher. David Walker, definitely going to go higher. Honestly, I think I'm pretty well set on the edges. There's a guy who I didn't even list on my board on this top 26 that might go higher in like the 3rd round or so, Ja Joyner out of Minnesota. Great athlete. When it comes to Ricky Bobby pass rushers, I've seen so many of them come in and then turn into nothing. And he's just another one of those for me that wants to go fast and doesn't know how to use his hands. And if you want to go fast and don't know how to use your hands, it's not a long-term career for you.
Yep. And I think that's a good pivot to then the summary. So first of all, I like your board. I'm going to give you a couple of surprises just from, okay, you have Tyler Barron higher than anybody that I've seen.
I like Tyler Barron.
Right. So that's a day 2 grade, right?
No, Tyler Barron, late day 2, early day 3. So like fringe day 2.
Yeah, fringe
3rd round.
So that was, I hadn't seen him day 2. I'd seen him on the board, but I hadn't seen, and maybe I misinterpreted the grades that you gave me when I color coded it. So that was my bad.
Yeah. Late day 2, early day 3, like he's got a 100 grade, which for me is, I would take him in the 3rd round. If everybody on this group is gone by then, I would take Tyler Barron in the 3rd round right there. No problem.
Yep.
But
and then
he's probably my top of the 4th round guy.
Yeah. And then the other thing I wanted to be able to point out, and you already alluded to it with Ja Joyner, is you have 26 guys listed. And we could probably name 10 more guys that are going to get drafted that aren't even you don't even have a round 5 grade on. Which would include
deep class.
Joyner, Kamen Rucker, Fadil Diggs. Those were the 3 that immediately came to my mind that I have round 5 or better on. But that just, to your point, that just goes to show you how deep. So if your GM skips drafting edges until day 3, there's a lot of guys on the left graphic here that are going to be likely. Oh, and you have Rucker. I just noticed that. These guys on day 3 are probably going to be serviceable NFL edges for 5 to 8 years, kind of thing. Like they may not be setting sack records, but these are guys that are going to have decent NFL careers for 5 to 8 years. Go ahead.
These are your special teamers, your Lorenzo Carter rotational types, your James Smith-Williams plays the run but can't rush the passer types. Like, your guys that come in and they contribute, they get like maybe 2 sacks on a 400 snap rotation, but they're contributing. They're a role player, and that's a guy you need in your rotation. He's not going to set the world on fire, but he might force the quarterback off the spot and you get a pick off of it. Sometimes that guy is worth it. And on day 3, if you're getting that guy, like the way I look at it is NFL fans have very high expectations for a lot of their picks, and a lot of their picks don't pan out because they expect first day starters from their entire draft class from round 1 to round 7, and they want all of them to be all pros. If your round 6 guy is a special teamer at defensive end or outside linebacker in a 3-4, and he's coming in and he's playing 200 snaps a year on special teams, he's your ace. And then he also comes in for another 200, 250 snaps as a pass rusher, and he gets, a sack or 2 a year, but he's coming in and he plays the run well and he does everything else well and he's a great special teamer. That's a hit on a 6th round pick. That's a depth player that as he grows, he might eventually be a consistent starter who gets 6-7 sacks a year, but he may not get the starting role until 2 guys go down in front of him. That's okay. You spend a 6th round pick on a depth player. You didn't spend it on this guy's my star number 1 top best player ever. And I think a lot of NFL fans they expect these guys to be way more than they are right away. Some of these guys are going to take a couple years to even get close to their ceiling. Looking at Shamar Stewart. Some of these guys might be great day 1, Abdul Carter, or after about 8-9 games in the NFL, Princely. But some of them, they're going to have a very specific role year 1, like James Pierce and Mike Green, of go knock a quarterback's head off. Or they might not be used as much as a pass rusher year 1, like Jalen Walker, and he's going to be coming in as that 3rd linebacker depth guy. In a 4-3. He's that strong side linebacker who comes in, protects against the run, and gets after the passer here and there. But for the most part, he's still learning the game. So you can't expect every single pick to come in and be an all-pro right away. Give these players time. This is about potential. And I'm gonna hit on a couple. I'm gonna miss on a hell of a lot more.
Yep.
We all miss. And it's figuring out why you miss. Now, sometimes you miss because there's off-field stuff, and I don't have a background check company. I don't have private detectives working for me. I can't do any of that background check stuff. I just go off of on-field athleticism. That's it. On-field and athleticism. That's all I know. That's the only information available to me.
Yep.
So
let's we've been going here for 70 minutes, so I appreciate your time. So let's close down the podcast. So for the 42 podcasters at the Draft Professor, for Scott, myself, thank you very much for watching. And we look forward to seeing you on another podcast soon. And everybody that's following, you are appreciated. And we go live again in about 45 minutes. So thank you, everybody.